The road to level 20 is paved with many choices, rules, and abilities, and if you've ever tried your hand at multiclassing, chances are you've made one of these mistakes along the way. I know I have. Taking levels in other classes certainly seems simple on the surface, right? But a lot of first-time multiclassers aren't actually even aware of the totally separate rule set in the player's handbook that covers this in detail. And even less players are aware of the rules and implications that aren't implicitly stated therein.
Ancient DM secrets.
But before we get to any of the advanced reading material, let's go over the rules as written for multiclassing. First off, when your character achieves a new level, you have the option to take that level in another class. This much should be apparent, but just in case, this level begins at the very first level in that new class. For example, if my level 4 sorcerer decided to take a level in rogue at 5th level, they would gain the features and abilities granted to the rogue at level 1, and although they would be considered a level 5 character, their class level would be denoted as sorcerer 4, rogue 1. Again, this should be easy enough to understand, but take special note of the distinction between character level and class level, as this will come up a lot as we move along. So let's start multiclassing. Wait a second. Why isn't it working? Well, it seems we've arrived at our first common mistake. Many forget that to level into another class, we must first meet the ability score requirements for the class we're leveling into, as well as the class that we're leveling out of. In the aforementioned example, our sorcerer meets the charisma requirement of 13 or higher to multiclass out, but does not meet the dexterity score requirement of 13 or higher for the rogue. And some classes actually require multiple ability scores of 13 or above. Here's a list of those requirements for each class, just so you're aware. But when it comes to multiclassing mistakes, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, what if we somehow have our ability score lowered after multiclassing so that it no longer meets the requirements? It's a very special case, but an interesting one because there's actually no answer in any D&D material. So do we lose levels as a result until we get our score back somehow? Well, while that would be interesting, the way I've always ruled it is that your character would retain the levels they've already gained, but cannot gain any more levels in that class until they meet the requirement again. It's sort of like how I still know calculus from college, but couldn't hope to learn any more since my intelligence score has dropped quite a bit since then. Now that we've cleared our first hurdle, let's continue on with the example. As a sorcerer, we've been able to add 1d6 hit points plus our constitution modifier each time we've leveled up, and so far, our pool of hit dice is 4d6. But since Rogue has a d8 hit die, we'll be able to gain that many hit points plus our con mod instead, bringing our new hit die pool to 4d6 and 1d8. So, in short, your hit dice correspond to your class level in each. Seems simple enough, and similarly, ability score improvements and or feats are also tied to class level, coming at every 4 levels we take in a given class. This brings up another common misstep, wherein you may be tempted to only take a few levels in your base class before bouncing out of it. Doing so, however, would actually cause you to miss out on a big opportunity for improving your build, at least until you earn that 4th level. But even with this in mind, be careful. Not everything operates off of class level like this. Take proficiency bonus, for example, which operates based off of character level instead, or experience points for advancement, which also operates off of character level and not class level. And what about cantrips that scale with you as you level, like Eldritch Blast, Vicious Mockery, and Green Flame Blade? Well, that's actually a question I had to ask at one point, and it was one that at the time wasn't answered in any source book. However, with an entry in the Sage Advice Compendium, I finally got my answer, and I realized that I'd been doing it all wrong. Cantrips that scale with you as you level are actually tied to your character level and not your level in the class that granted you the cantrip. That's right. So you could level up a fighter and then suddenly take a level in Bard, gaining Vicious Mockery, and allowing you to do larger amounts of damage with it right off the bat. It honestly wasn't very intuitive, but the change made my multiclass go a lot smoother from that point, and I urge you not to hold yourself back like I did. Also, Don't hold yourself back from liking the video if any of this has been useful to you too. Thanks. So now that we know how all this stuff works together, we can just pick a class to level into and add all the stuff it gets. Right? Well, yes, but there are a few more rules regarding what another class can actually give us and what it can't. For starters, you'll only get some of the base proficiencies for each class as detailed on this chart. Of course, anything that comes online as part of an actual class feature is fair game. The same goes for proficiency and saving throws. Additionally, you won't get a second batch of starting equipment. You only get that for your first class. Further, you won't be able to stack any AC calculations that you get between classes. This rule exists for other character options that offer separate AC calculations, so you may also be aware of this, but as a rule of thumb, you can only ever use just one AC calculation at a time. And it's for this reason that the unarmored defense feature, most common in monks and barbarians, doesn't stack either. But there are a few other features that have special rules pertaining to multiclassing. In particular, Channel Divinity will allow you to gain a new effect as it relates to the class you've selected, but you'll only be able to use it as many times as the maximum number granted to you by either class. The extra attack feature will also not allow you to stack multiple extra attacks on top of one another. So no multiclassing a monk, fighter, ranger for 4 total attacks per attack action. But that would be neat, wouldn't it? So what about traditional spellcasters? Surely they don't get to do whatever they want when multiclassing, right? Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly why I've saved the special rules for spellcasting until now. So many people get this wrong, and I really don't blame them. It's a lot. It does start pretty simple, however. When considering what spells you know and how many you can have prepared, you just take everything from each of your classes. So if you can know 2 cantrips and 4 first level spells in one class and 2 first level spells in another, you have access to all of them. Easy, right? Don't get used to it. Spell slots are where things start to get a little tricky. Unlike the spells you know or have prepared, you don't get to just add them all together. Instead, you need to refer to this chart and incorporate some wonky math. For each level you have in a full caster class like Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, and Wizard, you'll add a level to your multi-class spellcaster level. You may notice that I left the Warlock off of this list intentionally, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Next, for each level of a half-caster class like Ranger and Paladin, you'll add 1/2 rounded down to your total multi-class spellcaster level. Now you'll add up 1/3 rounded down for each level you have in Fighter or Rogue if you took the specific subclasses of Eldritch Knight or Arcane Trickster respectively, and add that to your total multi-class spellcaster level. Whew. So that's it, right? Well, it was. Then came the Artificer. For this class only, you will add 1/2 for each level you've taken, and then round up instead of down. Seriously, I feel like Wizards of the Coast is just messing with us at this point. So, finally, with your multi-class spellcaster level figured out, you can see how many spell slots you get. Now, you might have spell slots higher in level than the spells you currently have from any of your classes. That's okay. It just means that you can use those spell slots to upcast your lower level spells. And we're still not done. You forgot about the Warlock, didn't you? This final class exists as yet another exception to your calculated spell slots, but it's actually a really cool one. It's one of the reasons that Warlock is one of my favorite classes to dip with spellcasters. The rules here state that if you have pact magic as a Warlock and spellcasting from another class, you will gain your Warlock spells as normal, just separate from your multi-class spellcaster slots. It seems silly at first until you realize that you regain those slots automatically on a short rest, and you can use them to cast any of your other spells. All that plus the Eldritch Blast cantrip that scales with your character level and not the class level? Yes, please. And as we finally move past our special rules for multiclassing spellcasters, it's time to crack open those ancient DM secrets I mentioned earlier. When it comes to choosing multiple classes for your character, it's easy to make some ridiculously powerful and unique builds, but it's just as easy to mess up and create something completely suboptimal and really underpowered. So you'll want to really give your build a lot of thought before moving on with a multiclass. But that doesn't mean that you should only ever create the most powerful character that you can by optimizing the rules with no regard for the character itself. As a rule at my table, I always ensure that a character's multiclass is motivated by backstory, role-playing, and storytelling that makes sense for that character. You'll want to make sure that your DM is okay with this stuff before springing it on them as well. After all, multiclassing is an optional rule in 5e, meaning that it won't be allowed at every game table out there, because this is a ton of information, and it can add an extra level of complexity to your game if you aren't careful. But if you ever do get confused, you should probably subscribe to the channel and like the video so you can find it again if you ever need to, since not even the player's handbook seems to have all the answers. So, until that time when you come back to watch this video again, go out there and make some chaos.